Elijah Brooks was 41 years old and knew exactly how long a dollar could last if a man respected it. Every morning before the sun touched the Baltimore skyline, he stood in the narrow kitchen of his two-bedroom apartment, making black coffee in a chipped mug while his daughter Maya sat at the table with her school backpack open and one shoe always missing. He worked freelance electrical and audio repair wherever the city needed quiet hands: school gyms, hotel ballrooms, church basements, charity stages, places where people noticed the lights but never the man who kept them from flickering. His old pickup had a cracked dashboard, a toolbox that rattled over potholes, and a folded drawing taped above the glove compartment that Maya had made in second grade. It showed the two of them holding hands under a yellow sun. Beneath it, in uneven purple letters, she had written, "My dad always comes back." Elijah looked at that sentence every morning before turning the key. It kept him honest. It kept him tired. It kept him moving. That Thursday, he dropped Maya at school with a kiss on her forehead and a reminder to finish her spelling worksheet before drawing rockets in the margins. She rolled her eyes, smiled anyway, and ran through the rain with her lunchbox bumping against her hip. Elijah watched until she disappeared behind the double doors. Only then did he let the weariness settle into his shoulders. The Whitmore Children's Foundation Gala was scheduled for 6 that evening at the Langston Grand Hotel, and the audio company that usually handled it had called him at the last minute. Big room. Rich donors. Live cameras. No mistakes. The coordinator said it like a warning. By 5:30, Elijah was kneeling behind the main stage in a pressed but faded black work shirt, tightening a loose cable beneath a row of soft white lights. The ballroom looked expensive in the way some rooms tried too hard not to feel lonely. Crystal chandeliers hung over linen-covered tables. A baby grand piano sat near the west wall. Waiters moved in silence. Security guards watched everyone who did not look like they belonged. Elijah felt those looks pass over his worn boots, his old toolbox, the small streak of grease near his thumb. He had learned a long time ago not to argue with eyes. Let them look. Work still had to be done. Across the ballroom, Caroline Whitmore stood near the glass doors with her assistant Natalie Pierce beside her and her son Ethan close enough to touch but not close enough to hold. Caroline was the kind of woman people straightened up for before realizing they had done it. Elegant white suit, polished blonde hair pinned low, diamond earrings small enough to seem tasteful and expensive enough to make silence. Her beauty had edges, controlled, striking, guarded. She smiled for donors with perfect timing, but her eyes kept returning to Ethan, who stood stiffly under the lights, one hand clutching the cuff of his sleeve. Elijah noticed the boy before anyone else did. Not because Ethan was loud. Because he was too quiet. The child kept blinking at the flashes from the photographers, his breath shallow, his small face folding inward like he was trying to disappear without moving. Something felt wrong. Elijah slowed his hands around the cable. A stage manager brushed past him and muttered, "Stay behind the curtain when Mrs. Whitmore speaks. We don't need maintenance in the camera frame." Elijah nodded once. No anger. No apology. Just a man storing insults somewhere it could not reach his daughter later. Then the microphone hissed. Caroline stepped onto the stage to soft piano music and polite applause. Ethan was guided beside her by a nervous event aide. His eyes darted toward the crowd, the cameras, the chandeliers, the exit. Elijah saw the child's fingers start to tremble. Then he noticed it. A tiny blue toy car had slipped from Ethan's pocket and landed near the edge of the stage, just beyond the curtain line. The boy saw it too, and panic flickered across his face as if that little car was the last familiar thing in the room. Elijah reached down, picked it up, and held it carefully in his open palm. He did not step forward. He did not call attention to himself. He only crouched near the stage steps and waited where the boy could see him. Ethan's eyes locked on the car. Then on Elijah's face. Something in the child changed. Before Caroline could begin her speech, Ethan pulled away from the aide, crossed the stage in a sudden, small rush, and threw his arms around Elijah's neck. The ballroom froze. Cameras turned. A whisper moved through the room like cold air under a door. Elijah went still, one hand hovering above the boy's back, careful, respectful, stunned. Ethan pressed his face into Elijah's shoulder and said one word, soft but clear enough for the front row to hear. "Dad." Caroline's smile vanished. For one breath, she looked less like a billionaire and more like a mother whose private fear had been dragged into public light. Grant Ellison, the family attorney, stepped forward sharply, his face hard with suspicion. But Elijah did not move. He lowered his voice, warm and steady. "You didn't do anything wrong, little man." Before we go deeper into what he discovered that day, tell us where you're watching from and do not forget to subscribe, because what happened next changed the way everyone looked at him. Caroline came down from the stage slowly, every heel strike measured against the marble floor. Her perfume reached him first, clean and expensive, followed by the quiet force of her presence. She looked from her son's hands gripping Elijah's collar to the grease on Elijah's thumb, to the old blue toy car still resting in his palm. Her voice was low enough not to shake, but sharp enough to cut through the room. "Why does my son call you Dad?" Elijah met her eyes. He could feel every camera, every judgment, every assumption waiting for him to become the man they already believed he was. Instead, he looked down at Ethan, who was still trembling against him, and then back at Caroline. He did not explain. Not yet. Because near the stage steps, half hidden under a black curtain, a small security monitor had caught everything from an angle no one else had seen. And Natalie Pierce, watching the replay from the control table, suddenly covered her mouth as the footage revealed what Elijah had done for Ethan 3 weeks before. For a moment, nobody in the Langston Grand Ballroom seemed to remember how to breathe. The applause had died so completely that the soft hum of the air conditioning became noticeable above the crystal chandeliers. Ethan Whitmore kept his arms locked around Elijah Brooks as if the man in the faded black work shirt was the only solid thing in a room full of polished strangers. Elijah could feel the boy shaking. Not dramatically. Not for attention. It was the small tremor of a child trying very hard not to fall apart in public. He knew that tremor. He had felt it in Maya years ago, the first time she woke up from a nightmare and reached across an empty side of the bed for a mother who was not coming back. So Elijah did the only thing that made sense. He stayed still. He did not hug Ethan too tightly. He did not pull away too fast. He let the boy hold on without making the moment bigger than the child could survive. Caroline Whitmore stood 3 feet away, elegant and motionless, with 1,000 eyes waiting for her to become either cruel or weak. She chose neither. Her face remained calm, but the color had left her cheeks. The question she had asked still hung between them, sharper than the camera flashes. Why did her son call this stranger Dad? Grant Ellison stepped closer, lowering his voice but not enough. "Mrs. Whitmore, move away from him. Security can handle this." Elijah heard the word handle and felt something old and familiar settle in his chest. Men like him were often handled before they were heard. He lifted his free hand slowly, palm open, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he understood how fear looked when it wore a suit. "I am not holding him here," Elijah said quietly. "He came to me." Grant's jaw tightened. "You expect us to believe that?" Elijah looked at the attorney, then back at Caroline. He did not answer the insult. He had learned that dignity was not silence. It was choosing which words deserved breath. Ethan's fingers twisted tighter in Elijah's collar. Caroline saw it. That was the part that disturbed her most. Her son did not cling to people. He tolerated them. Nurses. Tutors. Child psychologists. Private school counselors. Even Caroline herself, on the bad days, felt like someone knocking gently on a locked door from the outside. But now Ethan was breathing against this man's shoulder like he had found a room where the lights were softer. Something about that made Caroline angry before it made her sad. She turned toward Natalie Pierce, who was still at the control table near the back of the ballroom, pale under the glow of the monitors. "Natalie," Caroline said, her voice controlled. "What did you see?" Natalie swallowed. Her eyes flickered toward Elijah, then Ethan, then the small security screen. "There is footage from the South Hallway archive," she said. "From the Foundation walkthrough 3 weeks ago." Grant cut in immediately. "This is not the time." Caroline did not look at him. "Play it." Elijah felt Ethan stiffen. The boy's breath caught on the edge of a sound. Elijah lowered his voice, speaking only to him. "Easy, little man. No one is in trouble." It was such a simple sentence, but Caroline heard it like a language she had forgotten. No one is in trouble. Not perform. Not behave. Not stand straight. Not smile for the donors. Just breathe. The large presentation screen behind the stage still displayed the Foundation logo, a silver tree over a white background. Natalie hesitated, then tapped the control panel. The logo disappeared. Grainy security footage filled the screen. A narrow service hallway. Fluorescent lights. A row of storage doors. Caroline's posture changed at once. She knew that hallway. She had walked through it during rehearsal week, phone pressed to her ear, answering questions about donors, seating charts, and whether Ethan would be able to appear beside her for at least 90 seconds. In the footage, Ethan appeared near the far wall, smaller than he looked in the ballroom, one hand pressed against his chest, the other holding the same little blue toy car. He was alone. Then the picture jumped slightly, and Elijah entered the frame carrying his toolbox. The room watched in silence. Caroline felt her throat tighten, but she did not understand why yet. On the screen, Elijah stopped several feet away from Ethan. He did not rush toward him. He did not touch him. He set his toolbox down slowly, then lowered himself to sit against the opposite wall, leaving space between them like space was a kind of respect. The footage had no sound, and somehow that made it worse. Every person in that ballroom leaned closer, trying to read the quiet. Caroline's eyes narrowed, searching for manipulation, for calculation, for anything that would give her back the certainty she had walked in with. But the camera showed only a tired black single father in a work shirt, sitting on a hallway floor beside a frightened boy who was not his. Elijah watched the screen once, then looked away. He did not want credit for a moment that had belonged to a child's fear. Caroline noticed that too. She kept watching him, and for the first time all evening, she did not know where to place him in the world she understood. Then, on the footage, Ethan slid the blue toy car across the floor toward Elijah. And Caroline saw her son mouth a word she could not hear, a word that made Natalie cover her mouth again and made Elijah close his eyes as if he had been hoping no one would ever see this part. The word on the security screen never reached the speakers, but Caroline Whitmore understood it by the shape of her son's mouth. Dad. Not loud. Not dramatic. Not the kind of word a child used for attention in a room full of adults. It had been quiet, almost careful, as if Ethan himself was not sure he was allowed to need someone that much. Caroline felt something inside her shift and then immediately tried to force it back into place. She had built her life on control. Control of companies. Control of headlines. Control of rooms where powerful men expected her to smile before disagreeing. But no one had taught her how to control the ache of seeing her child give a sacred word to a man she had never invited into their lives. Grant Ellison moved first, because men like Grant were most comfortable when compassion could be treated like a threat. "Turn it off," he said, stepping between Caroline and the screen. "This is inappropriate. We need security, legal review, and a statement before this reaches any donor phone." Caroline did not answer. Her eyes remained on Elijah Brooks. He still had one knee on the floor, one arm loose and careful around Ethan, as though even comfort had boundaries. He had not smiled at the footage. He had not looked proud. If anything, he looked tired in the way decent people looked when their private kindness was dragged into public light. That bothered her. A man trying to use her son would have performed innocence. Elijah simply endured being seen. "Mr. Brooks," Caroline said. The ballroom listened. Elijah looked up. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was steady, respectful, and that respect irritated her because it gave her nothing to punish. "How long have you known my son?" "I do not know him, ma'am." "Not really." Grant gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "That is convenient." Elijah did not look at him. "I met him in that hallway 3 weeks ago. He was scared. I stayed until he was not." Caroline's expression hardened, not because she disbelieved him, but because belief was more frightening. "And you did not think to notify anyone?" "There were 2 staff members at the end of the hall when I left," Elijah said. He was calm by then. "I figured someone responsible would handle the rest." The words landed softly, but Caroline felt them like a hand against glass. Someone responsible. She knew he had not meant it as an accusation. That made it worse. Ethan shifted against Elijah, and Caroline saw her son's small hand still clutching the front of Elijah's shirt. There was a faint smear of dust there now, transferred from the stage floor. Caroline had spent 6 months keeping Ethan's world spotless. Sanitized rooms. Carefully chosen therapists. Quiet tutors. Chauffeured rides. Imported toys arranged on shelves by color because Mrs. Helen Price said too much visual disorder could overwhelm him. Yet here he was, breathing easier against a work shirt that smelled faintly of rain, copper wire, and black coffee. She stepped closer. Ethan looked at her then, and the fear in his eyes stopped her before she could reach for him. It was not fear of her cruelty. She was not cruel to him. She knew that. She had read every parenting book Natalie ordered, paid every specialist, adjusted every schedule. But perhaps a child could be afraid of being managed, too. Perhaps love could become a locked room when it came with too many instructions. "Ethan," she said gently, testing a tone she had not used all day. "Come here, sweetheart." Ethan did not move. His eyes dropped to the blue toy car in Elijah's palm. Elijah noticed. Of course he noticed. He turned the little car over once and offered it to Ethan without drawing attention to the gesture. The boy took it with both hands. A few people in the front row exhaled, as if they had been waiting for permission. Caroline saw that too, and humiliation warmed the back of her neck. Not because her son had embarrassed her. Because strangers were witnessing a tenderness she had not known how to create. "Mrs. Whitmore," Grant said under his breath, "we need to remove the technician from the room." Elijah heard it. He rose slowly, making sure Ethan was steady before he stood to his full height. He was not dressed like the men Caroline was used to negotiating with. No tailored jacket. No gold watch. Just worn boots, calm eyes, and hands that looked like they had fixed more than machines. "I can leave," he said. "But do not make him feel like he did something wrong." The sentence moved through the ballroom and settled where the applause had been. Caroline's lips parted, but no answer came. She wanted to say that no one told her how to raise her son. She wanted to say that a stranger had no right. But Ethan was looking at her now, waiting to see which adult would protect his heart and which one would protect the room. Then Natalie appeared beside Caroline with a tablet held against her chest. Her face was pale, her voice low. "There is another clip," she whispered. "From after Mr. Brooks left the hallway." Caroline turned slowly. "What clip?" Natalie glanced at Grant, then at Elijah, then at Ethan. Mrs. Price was there. And so was the attorney. Grant's expression changed for less than a second, but Elijah saw it. So did Caroline. And suddenly the ballroom did not feel elegant anymore. It felt staged. Caroline Whitmore did not ask Natalie to play the second clip in front of the donors. Some instincts still worked, even when the heart was unsteady. She looked once at the cameras, once at Ethan, and then lifted her chin with the kind of composure that had carried her through boardrooms full of men waiting for her to stumble. "The gala will pause for 10 minutes, she said. Her voice moved across the ballroom without needing volume. "Please enjoy the reception in the East Lounge." No one believed it was only 10 minutes. No one moved at first. Then the staff began guiding guests toward the open glass doors, and the room loosened in pieces. Chairs scraped softly. Silverware clicked. Whispers followed Caroline like the hem of a long coat. Elijah stood near the stage steps with Ethan still close to his side, not touching now, but near enough that the boy could breathe. Grant Ellison kept his mouth shut, which told Elijah more than any argument would have. Men who loved control often became quiet when the truth started arranging itself without their permission. Caroline turned to Elijah. "You will stay." It was not a request, but it was not an insult either. Elijah looked down at Ethan, then back at her. "If he wants me to." Caroline's eyes flickered. She was not used to someone placing her son's consent above her command. Ethan gave the smallest nod. That settled it. They moved into a smaller conference room behind the ballroom, a private space with glass walls, a long walnut table, and a view of the rainy city below. The luxury felt suddenly useless. Natalie closed the door. The noise of the gala dropped into a dull murmur. Ethan sat at the far end of the room with his blue toy car in both hands. Elijah chose a chair 2 seats away from him, not too close. Caroline noticed that. She noticed everything now, as if the night had forced a new kind of sight on her. Grant remained standing near the wall, arms folded, his silver tie straight, his expression carved into professional concern. "This is becoming a liability," he said. "A child had an emotional moment. We do not need to turn it into an investigation." Natalie held the tablet tighter. Mrs. Whitmore asked what happened after Mr. Brooks left the hallway. Caroline looked at her assistant. "Play it." The video started silently. The same hallway appeared, empty for 3 seconds. Then Elijah walked out of frame with his toolbox, moving slowly, checking once over his shoulder before leaving. Ethan remained seated near the wall, calmer than before, the blue toy car resting in his lap. A minute passed on the timestamp. Then Mrs. Helen Price entered from the left, neat gray dress, pearl earrings, the posture of someone who had been paid for years to make concern look respectable. Grant appeared behind her. Caroline's face did not change, but her fingers tightened against the edge of the table. On the screen, Mrs. Price crouched in front of Ethan and reached for the toy car. Ethan pulled back. Grant said something. The clip had no audio, but his gesture was clear, impatient, dismissive, cutting through the air as if the child's fear were a schedule problem. Ethan's shoulders rose again. His mouth closed. The calm Elijah had left behind began to disappear. Caroline leaned forward. "Why was I not told about this?" Grant answered too quickly. "Because nothing happened." Elijah did not look at Grant. He watched Ethan. The boy had gone very still in his chair, eyes fixed on the tablet, thumb pressing hard against the toy car. Elijah knew that stillness. It was not peace. It was a child leaving the room without moving his body. He spoke softly, not to accuse, but because someone had to name what everyone was watching. He was trying to keep the car. Caroline turned toward him. Elijah nodded toward the screen. That was the thing helping him stay grounded. Natalie looked at him, surprised by the precision of it. Caroline looked back at the footage. Mrs. Price finally took the toy car from Ethan's hand. The boy did not fight. He simply folded inward, smaller and smaller, until even the expensive hallway seemed too large around him. Something in Caroline's face cracked, not enough for the others to call it grief, but enough for Elijah to see the mother beneath the billionaire. "Pause it," she said. Natalie froze the image. Ethan, on the screen, stared at the floor with empty hands. Ethan, in the room, stared at the same image with the toy car now clutched against his chest. For the first time, Caroline did not reach for an explanation that protected the adults. She looked at her son and understood that the room had not betrayed him all at once. It had done it in small, polished ways. "Ethan," she whispered. He did not answer. Elijah stayed quiet. He could have spoken. He could have corrected everyone. He could have made himself useful in a way that would make the room depend on him. But that was not why he was there. A father knew when to step forward. A good man knew when to step back. Caroline slowly lowered herself into the chair closest to her son, leaving the space between them open. No command. No performance. No promise she had not yet earned. Just presence. Ethan's eyes moved from the frozen screen to his mother's face. Then, barely above a breath, he said, "He let me keep it." Caroline did not ask who. She already knew. Across the table, Grant Ellison looked away, and that small movement told Elijah the night was not finished revealing what had been hidden. The smallest sentence in the room became the heaviest one. "He let me keep it." Caroline Whitmore sat beside her son and felt those 5 words rearrange the entire evening. Not because they were complicated. Because they were simple enough to expose what wealth had hidden. She had given Ethan rooms full of things. Custom shelves. Private tutors. Imported model trains. A birthday party with a magician flown in from Los Angeles. Yet 3 weeks earlier, in a service hallway under fluorescent lights, her son had needed only one small blue car and one patient man who understood not to take it away. Elijah Brooks stayed seated 2 chairs from Ethan, hands resting loosely between his knees, his work shirt still marked with dust from the stage. He did not look triumphant. He did not look wounded either. He looked like a man waiting for a child to feel safe enough for adults to matter again. That calmness made Caroline uneasy. Most men she knew filled silence with credentials, explanations, or demands. Elijah filled it by noticing whether Ethan's thumb had stopped trembling. Natalie lowered the tablet, her eyes moving from the frozen footage to Caroline's face. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said carefully, "there are additional hallway logs from that week, but we should review them privately." Grant Ellison straightened. "That is unnecessary. A misunderstanding over a toy does not justify turning a charity event into a tribunal." Caroline turned toward him slowly. Her elegance sharpened when she was angry, but her voice remained quiet. "I did not ask for your interpretation." Grant's mouth closed. Ethan heard the change in his mother's voice and looked up. Not afraid. Curious. It was the first time that night he had looked at her without bracing for instruction. Caroline saw it and felt a strange, fragile hope rise in her chest. She wanted to reach for him, but she remembered the way Elijah had waited in the hallway. Space could be respect. So she stayed where she was and rested her hands on the table where Ethan could see them. "Ethan," she said, softer than before, "did Mr. Brooks help you that day?" Ethan looked at Elijah first. Elijah gave no signal, no coaching, no rescue. Just a small nod that meant the truth was safe. Ethan swallowed. He sat down. Caroline waited. The boy pushed the blue car back and forth 1 inch across the table. "He did not ask me why I was being weird." The word touched the room like a bruise. Caroline closed her eyes for half a second. Weird. Had someone said that to him? Had he heard it in a tone, a sigh, a report written by a specialist who never had to sit alone under too many lights? She opened her eyes again. "You were not being weird." Ethan did not answer, but the car moved another inch. Elijah watched the movement and knew enough not to smile. Children hated when adults celebrated every breath like a performance. "He said the scary part would get tired," Ethan continued. "He said I could wait it out." Caroline looked at Elijah then. "You said that?" "Yes, ma'am." Why? Elijah's gaze dropped briefly to his own hands. The nails were clean, though old electrical work had left faint dark lines the soap never fully erased. Because sometimes fear does not leave when you tell it to, he said. Sometimes you just sit with it until it runs out of breath. No one spoke after that. Even Grant seemed to understand that interrupting would make him look smaller than he already felt. Caroline had heard hundreds of experts speak about childhood anxiety, trauma response, sensory overload, emotional regulation. They used long words in clean offices while Ethan stared at the carpet. Elijah had said one sentence, plain as rain on a windshield, and her son had remembered it for 3 weeks. That was the part she could not dismiss. A knock came at the conference room door. One of the hotel coordinators stepped in, holding Elijah's old toolbox with both hands as if it might stain her suit. "Sir, they asked me to bring this in." Security needed the stage cleared. Elijah rose immediately, but before he could reach for it, Ethan stood too. "That is his," the boy said, small but firm. Everyone turned. Ethan's cheeks flushed, yet he did not sit down. "Do not take his things." Caroline stared at her son. The command was not loud, but it carried something she had not heard from him in months. Protection. Recognition. Loyalty. The hotel coordinator looked embarrassed and handed the toolbox to Elijah. He accepted it with a polite thank you, then set it beside his chair. As he did, the latch caught on the table edge and clicked open. Inside were wire cutters, tape, a voltage tester, a folded school drawing from Maya, and a small spare toy car, red paint chipped along the roof. Caroline saw Ethan notice it. She saw Elijah close the lid gently, almost too gently. And for the first time that night, she understood there was another child in this story, another small heart connected to the quiet man her son had chosen. Before she could ask about it, Ethan whispered, "He has one too." Elijah's hand paused on the toolbox. Caroline heard the softness in her son's voice and felt the room shift again, not toward scandal this time, but toward something deeper. Something she was not ready to name. Elijah Brooks closed the toolbox before anyone could study what was inside for too long. Not because there was anything shameful in it. A man who worked with his hands carried pieces of his life wherever work called him. Wire cutters. Electrical tape. A spare fuse. A child's drawing folded at the corners. A small red toy car with chipped paint from years of being pushed across kitchen floors while bills sat unopened on the counter. Still, some things were not meant for conference rooms with glass walls and lawyers standing by the door. Caroline Whitmore noticed the care in the way he shut the lid. Not fear. Protection. The same quiet protection he had given Ethan without asking permission from anyone important. "You have a child," she said. It came out less like a question than a realization. Elijah rested one hand on the metal handle of the toolbox. "A daughter. Maya. She is 8. Ethan looked up at that. "Does she like cars?" The question was small, but it carried him a little farther back into the room. Elijah turned his attention fully to the boy, as if no one else needed him in that second. "She likes rockets more. But that red one used to be hers. She kept it in my toolbox for good luck after I fixed the sound system at her school play." Ethan considered this with the seriousness children reserve for sacred facts. "Did it work?" "The microphone did." Elijah's mouth softened. The spaceship made of cardboard did not survive the curtain call. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Caroline saw it like a match struck in a dark place. For months, she had watched therapists try to coax expressions out of her son with charts, puppets, reward systems, and careful voices. Elijah spoke to him like a person, not a problem. That difference unsettled her more than the footage had. Grant Ellison shifted near the wall. "This is touching," he said, smoothing the front of his jacket, "but it does not change the fact that Mr. Brooks is a temporary contractor with unexplained access to your child." Elijah looked at him then, not angry, not intimidated. My access was a hallway floor, sir. The sentence was quiet enough to sound harmless and sharp enough to leave a mark. Natalie looked down to hide the briefest smile. Caroline did not. Her eyes remained on Grant, and for the first time that evening, she saw his concern from a new angle. It did not look like protection anymore. It looked like management. Mr. Brooks did not seek Ethan out, she said. The footage shows that. Grant's jaw tightened. Footage does not show intention. No, Elijah said, before Caroline could answer. But children usually do. The room changed after that. Not loudly. Quietly, the way weather changes behind closed windows. Caroline looked at Ethan. Ethan was still holding the blue car. His thumb no longer pressed white against the roof. His shoulders had lowered. The expensive conference room, with its city view and polished table, seemed to have become less frightening simply because Elijah had refused to make himself large inside it. Caroline hated how much she needed to understand that. Why did you stay with him? She asked. Elijah did not answer right away. He glanced once toward the rain sliding down the glass outside. Beyond it, downtown Baltimore glittered in broken lines, traffic moving below like red and white threads. Because he looked the way my daughter looked once, he said. Caroline's expression softened, though she tried to hide it. When? Elijah's fingers tightened briefly around the toolbox handle. After her mother passed. No one moved. Even Grant had the sense to remain silent. Elijah did not dress the sentence up. He did not ask for sympathy. He placed the truth on the table and let it be what it was. Ethan watched him carefully. Children knew when adults were pretending. They also knew when someone had walked through a kind of sadness that taught them how to sit beside someone else's. Caroline felt the distance between herself and Elijah change again, but not into familiarity. Into respect. A fragile, uncomfortable respect. I am sorry, she said. Elijah nodded once. Thank you. That was all. No story. No performance. No attempt to turn grief into currency. Caroline was used to people offering pain like a resume when they wanted something from her. Elijah gave only what the question required, then stepped back behind his own dignity. Ethan slid his blue car across the table, stopping it halfway between himself and Elijah. You can borrow mine, he said. Elijah looked at the car, then at the boy. His face remained calm, but something moved behind his eyes. I appreciate that. Caroline's phone began buzzing against the table. Natalie glanced at the screen and went pale again. It is the foundation board, she whispered. The donors are asking what statement we are making. Grant seized the opening. Exactly why this needs containment. Caroline reached for the phone, then stopped. Her hand hovered above it. Across the table, Elijah was not watching the device. He was watching Ethan, who had just offered away the one thing everyone else had tried to control. Caroline withdrew her hand from the phone. For once, the call could wait. Then Ethan looked at his mother and said, so softly she almost missed it, he did not make me talk. That is why I could. Caroline's breath caught. And Elijah lowered his eyes, because he knew that sentence had not been meant for him alone. Caroline Whitmore heard her son's sentence and felt it move through her with the quiet force of something true. He did not make me talk. That is why I could. For years, her world had rewarded pressure. Pressure closed deals. Pressure moved markets. Pressure made boards agree, attorneys retreat, and reporters change their tone. She had mistaken that same pressure for strength inside her own home. Sit up. Try again. Tell the doctor how you feel. Look at me when I am speaking. Be brave for just 1 minute. She had called it helping because the alternative was admitting she did not know how to reach him. Elijah Brooks had reached him by doing almost nothing at all. That was the part Caroline could not forgive easily, not in him, but in herself. The phone buzzed again on the table, vibrating against the polished wood like an insect trapped under glass. Grant Ellison looked at it, then at Caroline, waiting for the version of her he understood to return. The woman who handled problems with statements, contracts, and clean exits. Caroline lifted the phone at last, silenced it, and turned the screen face down. Grant's expression tightened. "Caroline," he said, dropping the formal tone now that control was slipping, "you need to think strategically." She looked at him. "I am thinking about my son. That is exactly why this cannot become emotional." Elijah's eyes lowered at that. Not in submission. In restraint. He had heard wealthy people use the word emotional like an accusation too many times. As if love was disorder. As if a child calming down in a stranger's presence was a public relations issue instead of a human one. Caroline stood slowly. The conference room seemed to adjust around her. "Natalie, ask the board to wait. Tell the donors the event will resume when I decide it resumes." Natalie nodded and stepped out with her phone already in hand. Grant inhaled sharply. "You are risking the foundation over a contractor." Caroline turned back to Elijah. The word contractor hung there, small and ugly. Elijah did not flinch. Ethan did. Caroline saw that tiny reaction and understood, with a stab of shame, that children heard how adults ranked people. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and her voice was careful now, almost too careful. "I would like to make an arrangement." Elijah looked up. "What kind of arrangement?" "A paid one." Grant relaxed slightly, as if money had brought the room back to a language he trusted. Caroline continued, still watching Elijah. "Ethan clearly responds to you. I can compensate you for your time. A few hours a week. Transportation covered. Whatever your standard rate is, I will multiply it." Ethan looked from his mother to Elijah, confused by the shift. Elijah remained quiet for one long breath. Outside the glass, rain slid down the city in silver lines. Inside, the air felt too clean, too expensive, too full of people trying to turn trust into a schedule. "Mrs. Whitmore," Elijah said finally, "I fix microphones. I rewire panels. I troubleshoot soundboards when people need the room to hear them clearly." His gaze moved briefly to Ethan, then back to her. "I do not rent out a child's trust." Caroline's face changed. "Not much." "Enough." The words had not been rude, but they had removed every easy answer from her hands. Grant stepped forward. "That is an offensive interpretation of a generous offer." Elijah looked at him then. "No, sir. It is a careful interpretation of a dangerous one." The room held still. Caroline's pride rose first, sharp and automatic. She had offered help. She had offered money. She had done what people always thanked her for doing. But Elijah's calm made the offer look different. Smaller. Almost clumsy. "I am trying to help my son," she said. "I believe that," Elijah answered. "But if you pay me to stand where you are afraid to stand, he will know." Ethan's fingers curled around the blue car again. Caroline saw it and hated that Elijah was right before she was ready for him to be. He did not say she was a bad mother. He did not need to. The empty space beside her son said enough. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked. Elijah sat back slightly, giving the answer room to breathe. "Start smaller. Smaller than hiring you. Smaller than solving him." Caroline looked toward Ethan. The boy had lowered his eyes to the toy car, rolling it softly back and forth. Elijah's voice stayed low. "Sit with him when there is nothing to fix. Let him keep what makes him feel steady. Do not make every quiet minute a test." Caroline swallowed. It was the kind of advice no consultant would dare charge her for because it was too plain and too personal. Grant scoffed under his breath, but Caroline barely heard him. She walked to the chair nearest Ethan and sat down again, not touching him, not asking him to look at her. For nearly a minute, she said nothing. Ethan watched her from the corner of his eye. Then he pushed the blue car 1 inch toward her, not all the way, just enough to show that the door was not locked. Elijah saw it. Caroline saw it. Grant did not. And at that exact moment, Natalie returned, her face tense, holding the tablet against her chest. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "the board is waiting, but there is something else. Someone has already sent a clip from the ballroom to the press." Caroline lifted her eyes. Grant went very still. Elijah looked toward Ethan first, because whatever came next, the child would feel it before the adults admitted it. Natalie's words seemed to drain the remaining warmth from the conference room. Someone had already sent a clip to the press. Caroline Whitmore did not move right away. The version of her that the world knew would have reached for the tablet, demanded the source, called 3 attorneys, and turned the entire hotel into a controlled perimeter. But Ethan was watching her now, not the tablet. His eyes were wide, waiting to see whether the adults would become loud again. Caroline saw that first. Elijah saw her see it. That mattered. "Natalie," Caroline said, her voice low, "is the clip showing Ethan's face?" Natalie glanced at the tablet. "Partially. It is from the front row. It shows him running to Mr. Brooks. It includes the word he said." Ethan's fingers tightened around the blue car. Elijah leaned forward slightly, not enough to interrupt, only enough for Ethan to feel that someone had noticed. Grant Ellison stepped away from the wall with practiced urgency. "This is exactly what I warned about. We need a statement immediately." The contractor approached the child during an emotionally unstable moment, and the family is reviewing the matter. Elijah's eyes lifted. The room went quiet around that sentence. Caroline turned toward Grant. "That is not what happened." "It is what protects you," Grant replied. "It protects the foundation. It protects Ethan." At the sound of his name, Ethan looked down. Elijah spoke before Caroline did, but his voice stayed even. "Do not protect him by making him sound broken." Grant stared at him. "You do not get to advise this family." "I am not advising the family," Elijah said. "I am speaking for the child sitting right here." Caroline felt the words land exactly where they needed to. Not against her. Beside her. That was the uncomfortable thing about Elijah Brooks. He did not push to replace her. He kept forcing the room to remember Ethan was present. The city lights blurred behind the rain-streaked glass. Outside the conference room, gala staff moved quickly through the hallway, pretending not to listen. Natalie held the tablet like bad news with a battery life. Caroline reached for it at last and watched the clip. There it was. Her son crossing the stage. Elijah kneeling by the steps. The embrace. The word. The room's gasp. Then the video cut off before Elijah's quiet reassurance, before the footage from 3 weeks earlier, before any truth had a chance to breathe. Half a moment, trimmed into a weapon. Caroline handed the tablet back slowly. Who sent it? Natalie hesitated. The file came from a guest account connected to the Ballroom Media Network. I cannot confirm more without hotel security. Grant's face remained composed, but his left hand moved to his pocket and then stopped. Elijah noticed. He had spent half his life reading rooms where people underestimated him. A mechanic learned to hear what machines tried to hide. A father learned to notice what adults thought children missed. Ethan noticed too. His gaze moved from Grant's hand to Elijah's face. The child saw what everyone else missed. Caroline was still focused on the tablet when Elijah quietly asked, was that network password printed on the staff sheet? Natalie blinked. Yes. For approved media only. Then it was not some random guest, Elijah said. Not unless your random guests get production access. Grant scoffed. Now he is a technology expert too. Elijah looked at him calmly. No, sir. I just fix the things people blame when the room does not work. Natalie's expression shifted. She turned back to the tablet, tapping quickly. He is right. The upload came through the production console, not a phone. Caroline looked at Grant. Who had access? Grant spread his hands. Half the event team, probably. This is a distraction. From what? Caroline asked. That question changed the room. Not because it was loud, but because it was finally pointed in the correct direction. Grant's polished confidence thinned at the edges. From your son being exploited, he said. Elijah stood then, slowly, his chair making no sound against the carpet. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, I should go. Ethan's head snapped up. Caroline turned to him, surprised. Why? Elijah's hand rested on the toolbox handle. Because if I stay, people will keep making this about me. It is not about me. Ethan whispered, no, the word stopped him. Elijah looked at the boy, and something in his face softened with a pain he would not let become visible. Little man, he said gently, your mother is here. Ethan looked at Caroline, then back at Elijah. But they keep taking things. Caroline heard it. Not accusing. Remembering. The toy car. The quiet. The truth. Now Elijah. She lowered herself beside her son again, close enough for warmth, not close enough to trap him. Not this time, she said. Ethan studied her, uncertain. Caroline looked up at Elijah, and for once there was no command in her voice. Please stay until I understand what happened here. Elijah held her gaze. He wanted to leave. Dignity sometimes meant walking away before a room learned how to use you. But Ethan was still watching him, and Maya's drawing in his toolbox seemed to weigh more than metal. He sat back down. Natalie's tablet chimed. A new message appeared from the foundation board, but beneath it, another notification opened automatically from the hotel archive. One more hallway file had been restored. Its timestamp was from the night Elijah helped Ethan. Its label read, deleted by authorized user. Caroline stared at the words. Grant Ellison did not look at the screen. And that was when she knew the first clip had not been the real scandal at all. The restored file sat unopened on Natalie Pierce's tablet for 5 long seconds, and in those seconds the conference room became a place where every adult measured what they were afraid to learn. Caroline Whitmore stared at the label, deleted by authorized user, and felt the old machinery of her life trying to start again. Identify the user. Contain the damage. Protect the foundation. Protect the name. But across the table, Ethan was not looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at the door, as if expecting another thing he cared about to be taken before he understood why. Elijah Brooks noticed that first. He always noticed the child first. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly, whatever is on that file, maybe he should not have to watch it in this room. Caroline turned toward her son. Ethan's face was pale under the soft conference lights, the blue toy car pressed against his palm. She wanted to say that he was stronger than everyone thought. She wanted to say that knowing the truth mattered. But Elijah's words made her hear the difference between truth and exposure. A child did not need to be present for every adult failure. Natalie, Caroline said, hold the file. Grant Ellison exhaled almost invisibly. Elijah saw that too, but he kept his eyes on Ethan. The boy had been asked to survive enough for one evening. Then Elijah's phone vibrated inside his pocket. He ignored it once. It vibrated again. A third time. His jaw tightened, not with irritation, but with the quiet worry of a father whose life had no room for unanswered calls. Caroline caught the change in his face. You can take that, she said. Elijah hesitated. It is my daughter. Ethan looked up at the word daughter. Elijah stepped a few feet away, turning his body slightly toward the glass wall for privacy without leaving the room. "Hey, baby girl," he answered, voice low and warm in a way that changed the air around him. Caroline did not mean to listen, but the room was too quiet not to hear the softness. Maya Brooks was on the other end, trying to sound brave and failing by half an inch. The neighbor who usually watched her after school had been called into an emergency shift. She was sitting with the hotel security desk downstairs because Elijah had left the address on the refrigerator and told her never to wait outside anywhere alone. Elijah closed his eyes for 1 second. Not panic. Calculation. Bus routes. Work hours. A little girl in a lobby too polished for her backpack. "You did right," he told her. "Stay where the guard can see you. I am coming." Ethan sat straighter. Caroline watched Elijah slide the phone away and reach for his toolbox. For the first time all evening, she saw the full weight of him. Not just the man her son had called dad. Not just the contractor with calm hands. A father with a child downstairs, a job interrupted, and a room full of wealthy strangers treating his dignity like an inconvenience. "Your daughter is here?" Caroline asked. "Downstairs," Elijah said. "I need to get her home." Grant immediately seized the moment. "That would be best." Caroline looked at him, and the look was cold enough to silence the polished concern on his face. "Natalie, have security bring Maya Brooks up. No cameras. No lobby delay. And get her something warm to drink." Elijah turned to her. "Mrs. Whitmore, you do not have to do that." "I know," Caroline said. The answer surprised both of them. A few minutes later, the conference room door opened, and Maya Brooks stepped inside wearing a yellow raincoat, damp sneakers, and a purple backpack with a space shuttle keychain hanging from the zipper. She was small, careful, and bright-eyed in the way children become when they are trying not to be intimidated. Her gaze found Elijah first. Only after he nodded did she relax. "Hi, Daddy," she said. The word was ordinary from her mouth. Lived in. Earned over thousands of mornings, packed lunches, math homework, bedtime prayers, and tired rides in an old truck. Ethan heard it differently. He looked at Maya like she had just spoken a language he had been trying to learn. Elijah crouched slightly as she came to him. "You okay?" "Yes, sir," Maya said, then glanced at Caroline and remembered her manners. "Good evening." Caroline's expression softened despite herself. "Good evening, Maya." Maya noticed Ethan's blue toy car and then the red one peeking from the toolbox latch. "You like cars?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. "Do you?" "Not as much as rockets," Maya said, "but my dad keeps that red one because I told him it helps machines behave." Ethan looked at Elijah. "Does it?" Elijah gave him a serious nod. "Only the stubborn ones." For the first time that night, Ethan smiled. Not fully. Not for the room. Just enough that Caroline had to look down before anyone saw what it did to her. Maya moved closer to the table, not afraid of Ethan's silence. She set her backpack down and pulled out a folded paper, edges soft from being handled. "I drew another rocket during aftercare," she told Elijah. "It has 2 seats this time." Ethan leaned forward before he could stop himself. "Why 2?" Maya shrugged. "Because if you go somewhere scary, it helps not to go alone." The sentence landed gently, but Caroline felt it open something in the room. Ethan looked at his mother, then at Elijah, then back at Maya. "Does your dad always come back when he says he will?" Maya answered without hesitation. "Always." Caroline's breath caught. Elijah lowered his eyes, not proud, just grateful and a little weary. Ethan absorbed the answer like a starving thing taking in warmth. Caroline understood then that this was not about a word. It had never been only about Dad. It was about return. About safety. About the terrible arithmetic children do when adults keep leaving in expensive ways. Natalie's tablet chimed again, reminding them that the deleted file was still waiting. But now Caroline could not look at Elijah Brooks as a stranger who had crossed a line. She saw the line more clearly than ever. He had been standing on the side where children felt safe. And she was beginning to realize how far from that side she had been. The question Maya had answered so easily stayed in the conference room long after her voice faded. "Does your dad always come back when he says he will?" "Always." Caroline Whitmore had spent years measuring responsibility in contracts, tuition payments, medical appointments, and trust funds. She had built a life where nothing important was supposed to depend on anyone showing up without being paid to. Yet her son had just asked a little girl in a yellow raincoat the one question he had never asked his own mother out loud. Ethan did not look ashamed after asking it. That almost broke her. He looked relieved, as if someone had finally put words around the fear he had been carrying like a stone in his pocket. Elijah Brooks stood behind Maya's chair, one hand resting lightly on the back of it, not claiming the room, just anchoring his child inside it. Maya had accepted the cup of hot chocolate Natalie brought her with both hands and a polite thank you. She sat beside Ethan now, drawing a rocket on the back of an event schedule with a hotel pen that probably cost more than her school lunch. Ethan watched the careful lines appear: a round window, 2 seats, a trail of stars. "You can put your car in the cargo part," Maya said. "So it does not get lost." Ethan slid the blue toy car closer to the paper. Caroline watched him do it and realized she had not seen him share space with another child this naturally in months. At home, playdates had been planned like diplomatic visits. Children from approved families. Supervised activities. 30-minute windows. Reports afterward. This was different. No one had announced a therapeutic goal. No one had asked Ethan to participate. Maya simply made room, and Ethan entered because the door was open. Grant Ellison, however, did not see a door. He saw risk. "This is emotionally compelling," he said, choosing each word with lawyerly care, "but we are drifting away from the matter at hand. The press has a clip. The board is waiting. We have an unknown contractor, his child now in a secure room, and a minor whose reaction may be misinterpreted publicly." Elijah's jaw tightened when Grant said his child, but his voice remained steady. "My daughter has a name." Grant turned toward him with a thin smile. "I am aware." "Then use it." The sentence was quiet, and that made it stronger. Maya looked up from the drawing. She did not seem frightened, only observant. Caroline saw something pass across Elijah's face, the controlled restraint of a man who had endured many rooms where people tested whether his dignity had a price. He did not raise his voice because Maya was there. He did not step forward because Ethan was there. Every choice he made protected a child from carrying an adult's anger. Caroline felt ashamed that she admired it before she understood how rare it was. "Grant," she said, "that is enough. Caroline, with respect, your judgment is being affected by the situation." The room went still. Natalie looked down. Elijah looked at Ethan. Caroline looked at Grant as if she had finally heard the tone beneath years of advice. A man did not need to shout to take control from a woman. Sometimes he only had to call her compassion poor judgment. "My judgment," Caroline said, "has been affected by watching my son become calm for the first time tonight." Grant's expression hardened. "And what happens tomorrow? When headlines suggest your child has attached himself to a stranger? When donors ask whether the foundation is stable? When his father's representatives call?" Ethan's hand stopped over the drawing. The room changed again. Not much. Enough for Elijah to notice. Caroline turned slowly toward her son. "Ethan." The boy did not answer. Maya stopped drawing. Even she understood that a shadow had entered without opening the door. Elijah remembered what Ethan had asked Maya. Always. Now he understood there was someone who had not come back, or had come back only in ways that made leaving worse. Caroline sat down across from Ethan, not beside him this time, giving him a clear path to look away if he needed to. "Your father is not here," she said softly. "No one is asking you to talk about him tonight." Grant exhaled in frustration. "That is not legally accurate. His father is still a custodial consideration." Ethan pushed the blue car backward until it bumped against Maya's rocket drawing. His face had gone blank, the kind of blank children use when adults make their pain sound official. Elijah leaned down slightly. "Little man," he said, "you do not have to answer grown-up words." Ethan's eyes moved to him, and the blankness cracked just enough for hurt to show. Caroline heard the phrase grown-up words and understood how many of them had been dropped on her son like furniture in a room too small to hold it. Custody. Transition. Schedule. Compliance. Adjustment. She had thought explaining everything made her honest. Maybe it had only made him tired. Natalie's tablet chimed again, and this time she looked at the notification with a sharp inhale. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "the restored file has an access note. The deletion was approved through family legal credentials." Grant stepped forward. "That is privileged information." Elijah did not look at him. Caroline did. The elegant, guarded woman who had walked into the ballroom an hour earlier seemed very far away now. In her place sat a mother beginning to understand that the people around her had been managing more than her schedule. They had been managing what she was allowed to see. Ethan whispered something then, so low the rain almost swallowed it. Caroline leaned closer, but did not crowd him. "What was that, sweetheart?" Ethan kept his eyes on the blue car. "He said Dad was busy." No one asked who he meant. No one needed to. Grant went silent. Elijah closed his eyes for half a second, not because he was surprised, but because he knew the particular cruelty of a child waiting for someone who had already been explained away. Caroline's hand trembled against the table, barely visible, but visible to Elijah. She did not reach for her phone. She did not call a lawyer. She looked at her son and stayed. That was the first brave thing she had done all night. Caroline Whitmore stayed with her son, and for several seconds that was the only decision that mattered. The tablet could wait. The board could wait. The donors behind the ballroom doors could wait with their champagne, their questions, and their polished concern. Ethan had whispered that someone told him his father was busy, and the words had not sounded like a complaint. They sounded like a lesson he had been taught too many times to argue with anymore. Elijah Brooks knew that sound. It was the voice children used when disappointment had become familiar enough to fold and carry. He looked at Maya, who had gone quiet over her rocket drawing, then at Ethan, whose blue car rested halfway inside the sketched cargo bay. Two children at the same table. One certain her father would return. One learning not to expect it. The contrast was so sharp it needed no explanation. Caroline placed both hands flat on the table, open where Ethan could see them. She wanted to promise him that nothing like this would happen again, but Elijah's earlier words held her back. Do not make every quiet minute a test. Do not offer a promise before the child knows what it feels like to believe you. So she said only, I should have been there. Ethan's eyes lifted. Not much. Enough. Grant Ellison stepped forward, irritation now barely hidden beneath professional polish. Caroline, I strongly advise that we move this conversation away from the children. Elijah looked up. Then stop making it about them like they are not here. Grant's face tightened. You are overstepping. No, Elijah said, his voice low and even. I am staying in my lane. Children hear tone before they understand terms. Maya looked at her father with quiet pride, then bent over the drawing again, adding a small window beside Ethan's blue car. Caroline noticed. Ethan noticed too. The boy's hand moved toward the paper, then stopped, asking permission without words. Maya slid the pen toward him. You can draw the landing place, she said. Ethan hesitated, then took it. His first line was shaky. His second was stronger. The adults fell silent because something more important than any argument was happening in plain view. Ethan was choosing to add something to the picture. Not erase. Not hide. Add. Caroline watched him draw a small square beneath the rocket. Then a door. Then, after a long pause, a porch light. Her throat tightened. She had never asked him what safety looked like. She had assumed it looked like gates, staff, alarm systems, and carefully checked visitor lists. Ethan drew a porch light. Elijah saw it and lowered his eyes, letting the boy have the moment without turning it into a lesson. Natalie stood near the door, torn between the tablet in her hands and the scene at the table. Her voice came softly. Mrs. Whitmore, the restored file confirms the hallway clip was deleted the same night. The access trail points to family legal credentials, but it does not show who physically used the login. Grant answered at once. Because authorized credentials are used by multiple staff for efficiency. This proves nothing. Caroline did not look at him. It proves something was hidden. For discretion, Grant said. For your protection. The word protection seemed to reach Ethan before it reached anyone else. His pen stopped. Elijah saw the boy's shoulders rise. Caroline saw it too this time. She turned to Grant, and the controlled warmth that had begun forming around her son disappeared from her voice. Not another word in front of him. Grant blinked, genuinely surprised. Excuse me. Not another word in front of my son that turns his pain into paperwork. Silence followed. Even the rain against the glass seemed softer. Elijah did not smile, but respect moved through his expression like a light behind a closed curtain. Caroline had not solved anything. She had not uncovered every hidden piece. But she had drawn one boundary that belonged to Ethan, not the foundation, not the press, not the family name. Grant looked from Caroline to Natalie, then to Elijah, as if searching for the person who had caused this loss of control. His eyes settled on Elijah. You understand what is happening here, do you not? Grant said. This man is becoming a symbol in a story that will damage you. A struggling contractor. A single father. A convenient emotional figure. The public will make him into whatever they need, and your family will pay the price. Elijah stood slowly, not in threat, but in decision. Maya looked up. Ethan froze. Caroline's eyes moved to him. Elijah lifted his toolbox with one hand and placed the other gently on Maya's shoulder. I have been made into things before, he said. A risk. A mistake. A charity case. A man who should be grateful for being allowed into clean rooms. His voice did not rise. That was why every word carried. I cannot stop people from naming me wrong. But I can decide whether my daughter watches me beg to be seen right. Maya's hand found his sleeve. Caroline felt the sentence enter the room and stay there. This was not pride for pride's sake. It was a father teaching his child that dignity was not something other people handed back when convenient. Elijah looked at Ethan then, and his voice softened. Little man, you did nothing wrong tonight. Ethan's eyes filled, but no tears fell. Elijah continued, and you do not have to lose what helps you feel steady just because grown-ups get scared. Caroline stood. Mr. Brooks. He paused. She wanted to ask him to stay. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to say she was beginning to understand. But Ethan was watching, and this moment was not about what she wanted from Elijah. It was about what she would finally do for her son. She turned to Natalie. Bring the board here one at a time if they need answers. No cameras. No statements involving Ethan. No mention of Mr. Brooks without his consent. Grant's face darkened. That is a mistake. Caroline looked at him, steady now. No. The mistake was letting people protect my life by removing me from my child's. Ethan's hand closed around the pen. Maya's rocket sat between them with 2 seats, 1 blue car, and a porch light waiting below. Elijah saw the drawing and understood that leaving too quickly would feel like another disappearance. So he set the toolbox back down. Not because Grant had one. Not because money had spoken. Because a child was still learning what staying could look like when no one forced it. Elijah Brooks set the toolbox down, and the sound of metal touching carpet was barely audible, yet everyone in the room felt the decision. Ethan's shoulders lowered a fraction. Maya returned to the rocket drawing as if the world had not just turned on a quiet hinge. Caroline Whitmore saw both children respond before any adult could explain the moment away. Staying had a shape. It looked like a tired man in worn boots choosing not to let a frightened boy mistake dignity for departure. Natalie Pierce left the room to bring the first board member in, and for the first time all evening, Caroline did not feel the urge to rehearse what she would say. She looked at Ethan instead. He had drawn a porch light below Maya's rocket, then added a small path leading to it. The line wavered, stopped, then continued. Caroline understood that kind of line. She had lived on one for years, moving between power and panic, motherhood and performance, love and control. Grant Ellison stood near the wall, no longer speaking, but his silence had changed. It was not patience. It was calculation. Elijah could feel it without looking at him. He had known men who lost arguments and immediately began building smaller traps. Caroline had known them too. She had simply mistaken some of them for advisors. The door opened, and Howard Bell, chairman of the foundation board, stepped in with a donor relations officer behind him. Howard was silver-haired, careful, and visibly uncomfortable in a room where the richest woman present had stopped treating optics as oxygen. His eyes moved over Ethan, Maya, Elijah, the tablet, then landed on Caroline. "Caroline," he said gently, "we need guidance. The donors are concerned." Caroline nodded. "They will be told that my son had a difficult moment and was treated with kindness by a man working this event. They will also be told that any speculation about my child stops tonight." Howard's eyes flicked toward Elijah. Not hostile. Assessing. "And Mr. Brooks?" Caroline looked at Elijah, then back at Howard. "Mr. Brooks does not belong to our statement. He is not a headline. He is a person." Maya looked up from the drawing. Ethan did too. Elijah remained still, but his hand rested lightly on the toolbox handle, grounding himself in something ordinary. Howard cleared his throat. "Of course. Still, the board is worried about association, security, and access." Before Caroline could answer, Elijah spoke. "Then ask me plainly." Howard blinked. Grant's eyes narrowed. Elijah's voice stayed respectful. "I passed a contractor check through the audio company. I was assigned to stage wiring and microphone repair. I found Mrs. Whitmore's son in a hallway 3 weeks ago because a speaker line had failed near storage. I sat down because he was scared. I left when staff arrived. Tonight, he saw me again." He paused, then added, "That is the whole impressive story." The simplicity of it made the room feel almost foolish. Howard glanced at Grant, as if expecting some legal fog to roll in and complicate the truth. Grant obliged. "There are still unanswered questions about why a deleted file only now resurfaced." Caroline turned to him. "Yes. There are." The board chairman heard the shift and looked at Natalie's empty chair. "Deleted file?" Grant's face tightened. "A technical issue." "No," Caroline said. "A judgment issue. And until we understand who made that judgment, no statement leaves this room without my approval." Ethan stopped drawing. The air tightened again. Elijah saw it immediately. He leaned slightly toward the table, his voice low enough for the children, not the board. "Maya, tell Ethan about the launch button." Maya smiled a little and pointed to the paper. "It is right here, but you cannot press it until everybody is buckled in." Ethan looked down. What if someone is late? Maya shrugged. Then you wait. Rockets are expensive, but people matter more. Howard's expression softened despite the tension. Caroline looked at her son. He was listening. Not shutting down. Not disappearing. Because Elijah had turned the room away from adult danger without pretending danger was not there. That was a skill no resume had listed, no check had measured. Grant noticed the effect and disliked it. This is sentimental distraction, he said. Caroline answered without looking away from Ethan. No. This is the first useful thing that has happened tonight. Howard took a slow breath. Caroline, what do you need from the board? She looked around the room, and when she spoke, her voice carried the clean edge of a woman who had finally found the correct priority. Privacy for my son. Full preservation of every security file. No public blame placed on Mr. Brooks. And Grant's legal access suspended until the deletion trail is reviewed. Grant's composure cracked. You cannot be serious. Caroline turned to him fully. I have never been more serious. Ethan's pen stopped moving. He looked at his mother with a cautious kind of wonder, as if she had just stepped onto his side of the room for the first time. Elijah saw that look and quietly lowered his gaze, letting it belong to them. Howard nodded once, slowly. I can arrange that. Grant stared at Caroline, then at Elijah, and the resentment in his eyes finally lost its polish. You are trusting a stranger over people who have protected this family for years. Caroline looked at Ethan's blue car beside Maya's rocket, at the porch light drawn beneath it, then at Elijah, who had asked for nothing but the chance not to be used. No, she said softly. I am trusting what my son felt before I was willing to see it. The words left the room still. Ethan pushed the drawing toward her. Not all the way. Just enough. Caroline placed one finger near the porch light, careful not to touch the lines. Is this home? She asked. Ethan nodded. Then, after a pause, he whispered, only if you wait. Caroline's breath caught. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment, because the boy had said the whole story without knowing it. Outside, beyond the glass wall, the gala murmured on, the press waited, and the rain kept sliding down the city. But inside the room, for the first time, Caroline did not move faster than her child's heart. She waited. Caroline Whitmore waited, and the room seemed to learn from her. No one rushed to fill the silence. Not Howard Bell. Not Natalie Pierce when she returned and saw Grant Ellison standing with the stunned stillness of a man whose authority had finally met a boundary. Not Elijah Brooks, who sat beside his daughter with his toolbox at his feet and let the mother and son have the space he had been protecting all night. Ethan's small drawing rested between them, Maya's rocket, 2 seats, 1 blue car in the cargo bay, and a porch light below it. Caroline kept her finger near that light without touching it. She understood now that a child's world could be damaged by people who never meant to be cruel, by schedules that replaced presence, by explanations that covered absence, by adults who called fear a phase because they were too busy to sit beside it. I can wait, she said softly. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, testing the words the way children test the edge of a frozen pond. Maya watched without speaking. Elijah lowered his eyes, because some healing was too private to stare at directly. Ethan moved the blue car 1 inch closer to Caroline's hand. Not into it. Just closer. It was enough to change her breathing. Howard stepped back toward the door, understanding more than he wanted to admit. I will handle the board, he said quietly. And the files will be preserved. Caroline nodded without taking her eyes off her son. Grant finally found his voice. You are making a permanent decision in the middle of an emotional incident. Caroline turned then. The elegance was still there, the polish, the calm beauty that had made rooms bend around her for years, but something warmer had broken through it. No, Grant. I am ending a pattern. He opened his mouth, then saw that no one in the room was standing with him. Not even silence. Natalie moved to the door and held it open. Security will escort you to a private office until access review is complete. Grant looked once at Elijah, as if blaming him for the collapse of a world Elijah had never asked to enter. Elijah did not return the look with anger. He only placed a steady hand on Maya's shoulder. A father did not teach dignity by chasing every insult. He taught it by refusing to become smaller inside one. When Grant left, the room did not become happy. It became lighter. There was a difference. Ethan leaned toward the drawing again and added a tiny square beside the porch light. Caroline watched. "What is that?" she asked. Ethan whispered, "A place to sit." Her lips pressed together. She wanted to cry, but she did not make her son carry that either. "Then I will sit there," she said. "As long as it takes." He asked it without looking up. Caroline answered the way Maya had answered earlier, without decoration. "As long as it takes." Elijah stood slowly then, sensing the shape of the night had changed. "Mrs. Whitmore, Maya and I should get home." Ethan's face tightened, but Elijah crouched beside him before fear could turn into panic. "Little man, leaving is not the same as disappearing." Ethan looked at him. "How do you know?" Elijah's voice softened. "Because good people say where they are going, and then they come back when they say they will." Maya nodded beside him, as if confirming a law of the universe. Caroline stood too, but did not interrupt. This time she watched Elijah model the thing her son needed, instead of trying to buy it, manage it, or hurry it. "I have to take Maya home," Elijah said. "She has school in the morning, and her spelling words will not learn themselves." Maya sighed. "They might if they cared." Ethan almost smiled again. Elijah continued, "But if your mother says it is all right, I can return tomorrow afternoon to pick up my final equipment invoice and say hello." Ethan looked at Caroline. Not begging. Asking if trust could include her now. Caroline felt the weight of that gift. "Tomorrow afternoon," she said. "And we will wait properly." Elijah nodded once. He lifted his toolbox and guided Maya toward the door. Before he stepped out, Caroline spoke behind him. "Mr. Brooks." He turned. The city lights framed her through the glass, but she no longer looked like a woman standing above the world. She looked like a mother standing at the beginning of a difficult road. "Earlier," she said, her voice lower now, "I asked why my son called you that." Elijah held her gaze. Ethan listened. Maya listened too. Caroline did not repeat the question. She did not need to. Elijah looked down at his worn boots, then at the drawing with the porch light, then at the boy who had mistaken safety for fatherhood because safety had been absent too often. "Because children do not choose the richest person in the room," he said quietly. "They choose the one who makes the room feel safe." No one moved. The words did not embarrass Caroline. They humbled her. Ethan looked at his mother, and for the first time that night, she did not look away from what she had failed to see. Elijah gave the boy a small nod, then left with Maya, his old toolbox in one hand and his daughter's backpack in the other. Caroline stayed seated beside Ethan long after the door closed. Outside, donors waited, headlines formed, and rain washed the hotel windows clean. Inside, a mother sat near a porch light drawn on paper, learning that love did not always arrive as rescue. Sometimes